right, what's up?
I'm good. Welcome.
We made it.
You
My
made it.
apologies.
Success. And so thank you very much for everybody. This is Disco BRYSO. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. We want to get into your story and get into exactly how you got involved in this movement and in this scene, which is so near and dear to us. When we decided to do this talk, we know each other through, I guess, through your photography and through your virtual presence online. And I've been following your work for many, many years. And I wanted to really, speak to you not only because of your work as a photographer, but also your writing lately and what you've been sharing online and sort of the openness that you've been about your life that really struck me as someone that was able to articulate what you're going through. And so, why don't you tell us a little bit? Just start at the beginning. Where are you from, and how did you discover this world of graffiti?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm from Seattle, Washington, originally born and raised. My family, my generation is a mixed race family. I have half authentic traditional Chinese, and then the other half is like German Irish. My Chinese family is very heavily influenced by a variety of criminal activities. So growing up, I was surrounded by Asian gang members of all kinds. So that began back when I was, around 11 or 12. Most of my time and cousins and friends were all in gangs, and they all had a tag, whether it was like Sparky or Buster or you know what I mean, just some other random ass word. And that was my first exposure. Was through the name of the gang. Everyone had an alias. And then by the time I got to public school, there was another contingent of graffiti writers, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. And they were not so much of the street-oriented type. They were more of the, no offense to the rap group Artifacts, but they were, the Artifacts, like misfit skateboard realm. And I gravitated towards that group just strictly because I think I saw an opportunity to gravitate away from a more dangerous element of life as I saw it. Um, so yeah, that was my initial graffiti experience. I originally started writing, the name of the gang that my cousins were in, 23rd Street Diablos. After that, I started writing the name of the gang that my best friend was in. There's a resurgence of the Rolling 80s that moved up from California. And then once I got into high school, I adopted like, the traditional graffiti name. Uh,
And so when you got into high school and you adopted your graffiti name, what name did you end up with? Had you changed it over the years, and how did that come about?
yeah, so the name that I originally had was one I picked out. It's funny, like people I think that are involved in graffiti, like in isolation, like you know what I mean, like the way that I came into it, where you don't know about like Can Control was a big magazine at the time. I didn't know what Can Control was. I didn't know about 12 ounce. So I picked ST, and then there was a star after. And that was my first tag. After that, I started tagging Caution with a K, Kausion, and I got a lot of flack for that. And then after that, I moved on to the word frame, and that was kind of the one that stuck the most. Frame was kind of like the name that I took all school and ended up getting, penalized heavily for the amount of damage I did around the school.
And so
So yeah,
and this is all in Seattle.
this is all in Seattle. At that point in time, I was suspended and expelled before my 16th birthday. So I got kicked out of public school essentially permanently until I was able to complete my quarters at a private Lutheran school that I my mom sacrificed like 5 grand for me to go there for 2 months. So that's how I ended up back in public school.
So I imagine she wasn't so happy with your graffiti activity.
My mom actually like didn't really seem to care. It was odd. I think she was more like I was always in the like gifted kids track, so she was really more concerned about what it meant for my future in terms of getting into college. And
Right.
so that was kind of her concern. She knew about like all the shit that was going on, you know what I mean? And in my Asian family, it married my dad, who was, also I think a street gang member, but back in the 60s and 70s, Seattle was a very organized crime friendly city. And so if you owned a family Chinese restaurant, you definitely had some connections with either corrupt cops or other elements of organized crime.
And so I guess so graffiti was very low on the crime sort of totem pole, and to probably the thing that was seen as such a harsh uh, thing, coming from a family that had so much crime and gang culture already as part of its history.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think of all of the things I could have been getting into, graffiti was like, you know, nobody really cared. I think they saw an opportunity more than anything to like try to instill discipline and self-control and to maybe help me see what it was that I was sacrificing. Like I ended up getting into NYU, and that's how I ended up going to New York. That was all based on the intelligence that I like earned through reading and through self-knowledge. So I think that was really more what they were concerned about. Like uh, I was 15 and I invested in Amazon, and there was a lot of things that I did in my youth that demonstrated the potential that I would have to contribute, I think, to, society at large, that they were very concerned about me potentially sacrificing.
I understand. And so you sort of escape gang culture once you get into graffiti culture. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that definitely was one of the nice trade-offs. I guess in hindsight, uh, the gang culture of the time, although Seattle is considered overall as a pretty like safe and nonviolent city, like, the I was growing up and it was like Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre's big hit had just come out, and I was listening to like Selly Cell and Be Legit and Drew Down, and I mean, you know what I mean? It was just like a different time. Like it may not have seemed like it was violent in comparison to modern day Chicago, but there were certainly, acts of violence all day, every day. As I mentioned briefly earlier, my cousins were involved in a fatal drive-by shooting. The victim was a 16-year-old high school student. So, there were friends and cousins that are still doing time and won't get out till they're in their 70s.
Incredible, incredible. And so you were able to dodge that bullet, so to speak, and sort of your life choices, perhaps more because of your interest than your desire to escape uh, the crime. But just being around that, how did that impact you? Beyond the obvious, sort of like leaving it. Did you have, because you were so close to it, did it psychologically affect you and impact you, or like did you walk around with sort of this fear or a chip on your shoulder as you entered into this new world, or were you sort of were able to separate it out immediately?
I think I had a lot of resentment for the other writers that I grew up around. I was always a small kid, and I don't look like you know what I mean, have any sort of ethnicity or color to me, and so I was treated very poorly. So I think I always had a chip on my shoulder, like you guys don't know where I come from, and every once in a while there would be some beef, and I'd get my friend Tony to come through, and you know what I mean, like just scare some kid from Queen Anne by showing up in his cutlass and just standing on the street, mean mugging with me, like just to let them know what was up. So it was, it was one of those things where I I had a lot of resentment because I was surrounded by people that I didn't relate to. They went home to two parent families and their dishwashers worked and you know what I mean? They didn't eat their dinners at 7-Eleven and it was just a different lifestyle and it upset me and it's understandable why that is.
And so when you were jumping into the writers movement and making friends with writers, did you get down with crews like the traditional way that it happens in Seattle? And what were those writers that you were seeing that even made you want to sort of get into the writing world? Like, what do you remember from those early days of being a young toy and kind of as you became this writer frame and get into trouble and looking around, what were you seeing?
I mean, I think to tie back to what I was saying earlier, like I ended up getting snitched on, and that was one of the big, I think, influences into why I had a lot of resentment towards those particular groups. And the alleged snitch was somebody who, uh, some career writers, I think, defended and probably still like are friends with, and you know what I mean? So it's one of those double-edged swords. Like there's two sets of standards. But I guess part of what I saw was I saw like I grew up around a lot of like very devoted writers that are still active today. We're talking 25 years later. They haven't slowed down. They have rap sheets that go into the 40s and 50s in terms of the number of charges that they have. A lot of them are well known, so I won't, obviously drop their names, but I think a lot of people maybe out there know who I'm referring to. I went to high school with Macklemore. I mean, there's just like, it was a very weird time for graffiti, for hip hop, for a lot of different things. Um, but the graffiti aspect of it, I think, really did instill in me the sense that like this area has something unique in terms of, encouraging people to commit and devote their lives to something that might seem totally meaningless. You look at like other scenes like New York, obviously, San Francisco, you got people like you can't find those like lifer writers, those people that are committed to the lifestyle. all around the country. They kind of exist in particular areas, you know.
So it seems like Seattle has some of those folks that you were saying before. What are some of those names that for the public that's listening today that do not know and they do not know Seattle history? What are some of those names of the writers with that type of longevity in Seattle?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of writers from Seattle that I think don't want to be known as being from Seattle. Um, and I'll try to say their names quickly so that perhaps it gets lost. But, you know, we have pretty famous writers like Attic and Malvo and Louis and Hurst and, um, you know, pretty much like a lot of really solid street bombers are from this area. You can go down to Portland and find people with equal longevity, and you know, I think it's really amazing how many people have come out of Seattle, whether or not that is well known. And I think that's, you know, the sad part about it is that the reason that I pushed Seattle so hard, even when I was in New York, where I think people are often afraid to, you know, broadcast where they're from, was because I'm proud of where I'm from. You know, I'm proud of the fact that people have been able to accomplish what they have from a place that used to be shitty. Like it was not fun to grow up here. All that you had to do was like smoke weed and play video games. You know what I mean? That was pretty much it. Um, and so that, you know, I'm proud of like fucking Kurt Cobain's from here, Jimi Hendrix is from here, Bruce Lee is from here. You know, you go into business and you can find all sorts of examples. So uh, I I I understand the lack of like wanting to associate yourself in a criminal subculture with the place that you're from. But also, I think that just kind of fuels the paranoia. Like, realistically, if you're not out there catching bodies, it's very difficult to compose a federal case across multiple states. You know what I mean? For tags and throws. So.
I get it. I mean, it's very interesting to hear about these writers from Seattle and not necessarily claiming it, not that they need to claim it, or when you start to be a writer and you move around, you stop being from one place. You start being from everywhere that you land, so to speak. But with the writers that you mentioned, they're all prolific. Is there something special about Seattle that you think contributes to this sort of street bomber mentality or proliferation?
Yeah, man. I mean, I think it has a lot to do with what I mentioned in terms of like, what are you going to do in a small town that doesn't have a lot of, you know, a lot of like structured activity? You're going to smoke weed and play video games.
And apparently in bomb.
Exactly. And then, you know, I guess that's kind of what I'm saying is there's, if you're not into, I mean, yeah, granted, you could smoke weed and be creative. Certainly, they go hand in hand. But like, it gives you the opportunity to develop creative outlets. And one of the things, like one of my favorite mantras is creative. You know, creativity loves constraint. And I think graffiti artists are some of the, you know, the strongest examples of that. When uh, I'm going to just quickly give a shout out to Knox because um, in meeting Knox and watching him paint and seeing the type of artwork he makes, uh, it's a really unique approach to creating graffiti. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you think there's no paint left in that can? well, watch me do three outlines and some dusty fillings. You know what I mean? Or, oh, you think you can't make art with a stick of glue in your mouth? Like, watch me do it and wreck your whole black book. Like, that's the type of I think mentality that really does, proliferate in the graffiti community, and it's fucking amazing.
And who is the artist that you mentioned to that you gave the example?
Oh, that was Knox.
NOX?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so NOX from Brooklyn. So yeah, definitely I see that in him as well. And it's someone that is constantly making art and really dedicated to it, no matter what it looks like. It's just continue to push yourself. And so, I think that these artists do have that and have that dedication and become lifers. And so, you know, you're a writer as a teenager. You continue to be a writer as a young adult. At some point, you decide to pick up a camera, or and start to photograph what you're seeing. Did that happen when you came out to NYU for college, or when did you become sort of behind the lens versus in front of the lens, so to speak?
Yeah, so it definitely began when I went to when I went to NYU. And actually, we were talking before I was able to join about some about additional photos, and there's a couple of early hard copy flicks in there from like the late '90s, like right around 2000. But there was definitely some of that. Like I think I was able to at least recognize the value in documentation, specifically because it was the emergence of the internet. We were like on the tail of art crimes, and what I saw with art crimes was like, you know, art crimes was amazing. Like, don't get me wrong, but it was kind of dominated. You know what I mean? Like, you had like a few people from each individual city that was like they were the ones that were submitting all the flicks. And so you got kind of a biased point of view of what was getting put up in that particular town. So it was interesting. I think that that's where it started for me, but it wasn't something that um, really took off strictly because of the financial constraints. And I think that that's, just that also ties into, to Knox from Brooklyn. Like the constraints sometimes are not just like, oh, legal constraints. They're like, I don't have enough money for paint. I don't have enough money for Prismacolors. Well, what am I going to do? You know what I mean? And so once digital came around, that's when I think I really started to take off and take it seriously.
And so here you see a photo of Noxer that you're talking about. And so just exactly, this candid shot somewhere, I guess on a platform somewhere,
Yeah, so
or
this is funny. This is actually right there on the left is Peter Sutherland, and that was a portrait that he was taking for Sneeze magazine. So I got a couple of like behind the scenes shots that I don't like. I don't think they knew that I got. There's one that I sent you. That's one of my favorite pictures I've ever taken of Knox sewing up the mask from the State Your Name video. Um, and it's just like, you know what I mean? That sort of you'd never like. It's hard to even visualize or conceive of an image like that until it actually happens.
yes. And he's put in so much work. So to be able to document him is is a real special opportunity.
It was a very special opportunity, and it's something that I don't I don't take lightly. I don't, I think I appreciated the value of every opportunity that I got to spend time with him, specifically uh, because it is such a rare situation.
Yeah,
Not,
I
not
remember
in
hearing about that.
DOD, like sitting in his bedroom, you know what I mean? Like just like just being his friend essentially. You know what I mean? It's like that is a very hard position to get into, and it wasn't something that I was trying to get into. I think it was more a matter of like, you know what, when you come out of like real poverty, it's almost like you smell it on other people, you know? Like I look the way that I do because I came out of real poverty, and I don't want people to know that. Um, but there are certain things that you just can't get away from. So, yeah, I really did. Like, I loved spending time with him. I remember a lot of things that he said to me that were, you know, just off the cuff, but like really powerful, like takes on his view of graffiti.
Yeah, yeah, no, and when you deal with writers that like you mentioned before from Seattle or coming to New York, and you deal with writers like Knoxer who are through and through street bombers, meaning that they spend their or have spent their lives painting the streets, walking the streets of their city, and adding their names to the walls day in and day out. They have a very different perspective on the city and on life and on how to deal with people. And then when you deal with folks who are very real about their, and you get, to be their friends, and you get to really know them, and you know their family, and you know their living situation, and you're in their lives. You get to see a side of the writer, the artist, that's not just the writings on the wall, but you get to really know the struggle. And the struggle might be, poverty, might be alcoholism, it might be, you know, family, who knows, but to be led into these homes, and the images that you've been sharing or that we've had up on the screen are intimate photos, and they're photos of behind the scenes, or people writing their names or out taking photographs, and these are not necessarily the typical photos that you normally would see shared in the world. These are a bit more personal, and something that we're not used to seeing when people are promoting themselves, where they're only promoting the final act, the final thing that they've painted, not the process, not the people. And so I could appreciate these images very much. And then you have, part of I think what you have been able to experience and to see, because you've decided to turn your lens on this, is decades of documentation, decades of writing on the street, and moments that are very odd, and perhaps unexpected and uncomfortable, as might be the case with this wall here by Nemel,
Mm.
with Rhino going right over it. and
Yeah,
uh,
and
and I
there's
remember
another
this.
one in there of Gwen. Yeah, that's just like a stomper over it. And yeah, it the I didn't mean to cut you off. I actually would value hearing what you had to say about that.
No, I remember this very well. This is in Wynwood in Miami. I was on this block when this was happening, because those guys, when was painting a wall across the street with maybe, I don't remember who he was with. And there's a lot of activity in December in Wynwood, years ago, when writers from all over the world are coming to paint. Writers from all over the country are coming to just hang out and party. And this is, to me, a moment when writers that don't know each other sort of collide on the streets. And Nemo, being a writer, I think he's from Philadelphia, is that right?
Hmm.
Yeah, writer being from Philadelphia, in Miami, doing a commission wall, I guess, or a wall that he had permission for, because he had a lift and the whole 9 yards. And then Rhino, who was just on a spraycation down in Miami, looking to bomb and take up space. And here you have, two worlds that are sort of colliding, two cities in a third city. And it kept getting dissed, and then Nemel kept coming back to fix it. So this building. I don't believe that this building exists any longer. It's been
Hmm.
demolished, and now a big garage sits in its place.
Yeah, that's one of the Goldman properties, and it's really interesting to hear your take on that because I spent like most of the days that during that Art Basel with Nemel, and I got to know him really well, and I got to like I think understand his perspective, and it's similar to my own. You know what I mean? Like I look a certain way, but you might not guess that my stepdad died of a methadone, you know, situation, and you might not guess that, Jesse had his own drug problems that were not just like a high class coke habit. You know what I mean? They were products of growing up in urban Philadelphia that was low income. And so when things like that happened, I think that it really did hurt him, like in a way that graffiti uh, doesn't typically hurt people when they've engaged in it for that long. You know what I mean? Tend to develop a little bit of a thicker skin. You like try to let it just roll off your back, but like having been there with him when he saw it on Instagram first, then we walked out of the hotel and saw it together. That's when I took those pictures. Like I could feel his pain. He didn't know what to do. He didn't like know if he should like blast them on Instagram, um, because he I think just felt misunderstood, and I understand why he felt misunderstood. It would not have been a good idea for him to try to, you know what I mean, flex on the street and like get in a fist fight with people. Um, and so he let it go, and I could see how hard it was for him to wrap his mind around that being the right thing to do. So there's so many different like things to consider, right? If you just like with this picture alone, um, because you have so many different perspectives from Rhino's angle. You have so many different perspectives from Wen's angle, who I've met, and you have so many different perspectives from Nemel's angle. And if you have the choice of like aligning yourself with the Goldmans, you know what I'm saying? And you get the hookups with the lifts, and you get the hookups with the paid airfare and lodging. Like, who could say that that's the wrong thing to do when you come from a family where your dad also is on methadone? You know what I mean? Like, it's just such a complicated subculture, and when you get to know the people and the stories, it's hard not to like, do you know what I mean? Just like throw your hands up and be like, "Hit this! It is what it is."
It's very complicated, and the rules of engagement of painting on the street, change all the time. They're broken, they're reinvented. There's a level of respect that everybody desires when when writers and artists go out and paint in the street. They desire to be respected. They hope to be respected, and they hope that whatever they paint is uh, is lasting and is able to be appreciated by others. But to the other side of that, it's also a space, the streets, where so many people are painting and so many people are competing for space, and everybody, for the most part, is anonymous. And you don't know if you're from another, you're in a town where people are just, coming in. Doesn't mean that you necessarily know who's who. Rhino probably didn't know who Nemel was and decided to just, go over the wall and not care because he maybe thinks he's better or bigger or badder or whatever. And there's this exchange of sort of masculinity and conquering that happens on the street. And it was, and I was able to witness that in person. And it's tough to witness, and it's tough to also be on the receiving end of that. So I can understand Neville probably not feeling so good about it and feeling uncomfortable about it, and seeing the piece gone, and knowing now what you're talking about, a history of addiction, or of addiction in family with methadone. This is someone that probably turned to graffiti as a very positive thing in his life, and maybe a bit of an escape, in the form of art and painting, and then for it to come around and sort of bite you in that way, uh, sounds like it really sucks. And for those of you that don't know, I'll take a quick pause here and sort of reset. My name is Alan Kett. You can hear my voice. This is Disco Bryso. This is our Instagram Artist Talk series, and where we speak about history, artists' careers, and trajectory, and the stuff that we believe is worth talking about and preserving from an institution perspective, from a museum perspective, for the future and for our culture. And for those who you do not know that are just joining us, we're talking about photography and writers and the streets and disco's journey. And the image that you see in front of you now is of Nemel from Philadelphia, in a wall that he painted in Wynwood, Miami, many years ago. I would say this might have been, 8 years ago or something like that, 2012 perhaps,
Yeah,
or
no, you're right on. It's 2013, I think.
to yeah, so almost a decade ago. And this building in Wynwood no longer exists. There is a huge parking structure here with a bowling alley underneath it that never opened. And as a result of COVID, and they went out of business, and the neighborhood has been transformed as it's become so popular. And so this particular year, there was a lot of activity here in Wynwood, and it was great to see. And Nemel, who you see here now, what makes this image so special is that he no longer is living. Nemel has since passed away. And so to me, images of members of our community that have passed, and we can share that, it's a way to remember them and their contributions. And so I never got to meet Nemel, but or maybe I did in passing on this block, but I know that he was definitely committed to writing, and found love for it, and it found a love for him. But it's not always sweet out here, as you're sharing with us.
He would have definitely been a little bit shy in meeting you, that's for sure. He had such, I think, a great reverence for like the New York group of writers that I would consider you to be a part of. That he really did like it brought out like a nervousness in him that didn't exist otherwise because it was like the thing that people don't know about Nemel is that he went the hardest when he was like, I mean, he went really hard like throughout his life, but when he was like 16, 17 years old, he was all city Philadelphia. There's a picture that I have of him in, doing a pretty decent sized piece in the Freedom Tunnels that he did when he was like 18. So it's one of those things where like, you know what I mean? Um, if he did meet you, you probably would have just been like, "Oh, you're Cat. I'm not going to tell you what I write. I'm just going to question and then tell somebody else about it 5 minutes later." So
Right. Well, listen, I appreciate seeing these images and you sharing them with us. And for all of you guys that don't know, that are joining us now, it's important for us to share these stories. And we do that at the Museum of Graffiti, to have this historical record and to bring the people that we know that are contributors of this movement to the world. And so one of the things that we're doing now in these artist talks is we have donations available. And so if anybody out there would like to support the Museum of Graffiti, there are badges. It's a new Instagram thing that you can donate some money to keep us going. And we really appreciate it if you contribute whatever you can, if you can at all. And so when we see these images and we see him here again, the writer that you document or that exists in the world, uh, uh, we come in all shapes and sizes and all backgrounds, and many of us come from broken homes and from a troubled past, and we go out and we find community in each other and in other writers. And so it's a bit, for many of us, it's sort of like writers are a bit of misfits or misunderstood outlaws. And so here you see Nemel, an image of him, and he's a bit unassuming, just a regular guy, not the Hollywood graffiti gangster that's been portrayed in films in the past. And so in your documentation of writers throughout New York and back home, was there, am I correct? Did you see any commonality between the writers and who they were?
I mean, they're not good necessarily. I mean, like one of the writers I didn't mention earlier that was pretty well known nationwide is Curse. And Curse was someone who also really did a lot of damage nationwide when he was much younger. And having spent a lot of time with him just sitting on a stoop out on Fourth Avenue, downtown, I got to know a little bit more about his background, and got to learn that, he did not have the best family environment. There weren't a lot of like positive, fun things for him to do there. Uh, Same could be said of another writer, Take, um, also from the same crew and same city. And I guess what that leads to is as far as I can tell, because I have personally experienced at various points, a desire to prove yourself as being worthy of that street cred. You know what I mean? Like I need to get in fights, or I need to tag as many small businesses as I possibly can, or I need to get that street cred. Um, because you're trying to fill a void that well-adjusted people have filled by their families, and that's really tragic. But also, I think that anything tragic has that other side to it too, because clearly, if it weren't for a lot of broken families and undesirable families, we would have a lot less graffiti on the street. So there's a good and bad to everything.
Yeah, I would say that I would agree with you that there is a good side to that, and many of the artists that have struggled, that have overcome their struggle, have really gone out to have incredible success and have good lives. But not everybody makes it through that journey. And I think some of the artists that you mentioned before, Curse or Take, they lost their lives. They lost their lives. Some of the people that we know have taken their own lives as they've struggled with mental health issues and addiction issues. And it's something that you have written about openly on your posts, and you're very honest with your struggles? You know, are you doing that? Is it cathartic, or are you trying to sort of warn, your peers or your fans, or people that know you, of sort of the dangers of street life, as an example?
Yeah, man, I appreciate you bringing it back home to that topic because I think it is the topic that's, while I love graffiti, you know, uh, saving someone from, or preventing someone from writing graffiti is not going to save their life. Preventing someone from uh, taking a press Xanax that actually is fentanyl is going to save their life. And I think that that is the difference to me between, you know what I mean? I think the overall mission or purpose behind what I do. And I do that because I have lost so many people in both my immediate family and in my group of friends that centered around graffiti or centered around gang life. Um, there's a huge amount of stress that we take on when we engage in these kinds of behaviors that we're not fully prepared for, and when it's glamorized, it can be difficult to get a real understanding of what that's like. So I'm not necessarily trying to deter anyone from shooting up. I'm not necessarily trying to deter anyone from writing graffiti. I am trying my best to present a realistic, you know what I mean, like slice of that life so that people can make an educated decision for themselves. Like, if you want to do that, by all means, but just be conscious of the risks that are involved.
Right. No, I like what you're saying, that you're putting it out there for the information to be known, and some people can make decisions or know maybe some of the dangers or some of the consequences that you've seen over the course of your life through the loss of your friends and family. And I think that that's a very generous and at the same time an important way for you to show up in our community and share, because that information, some people might have access to, and many people don't have access to, and are stuck in their own sort of, small bubble, or, this personal space where there's too much shame to talk about uh, loss or addiction or whatever the problems might be, and they might seem insurmountable. And so when you or others in our community decide to be honest and real and sort of share our personal struggle, I think it means a lot to many of us, but also it might mean a lot to that right person that needed to hear that message and that lesson. And so I think it's very courageous and very generous of you to do that, because it could help out others that are in that particular position at the moment. And I think that in this particular culture and this art movement that is rooted in an outlaw activity, that's rooted in the streets, we tend to create masks and armor for ourselves, and these identities for ourselves that are very tough and very private, and uh, and you hide everything from everybody, unless it's your very close personal friends, and that's done to save ourselves and sort of escape what's really happening. And so, I think that many people don't know how to ask for help, and then when they do, we're maybe not equipped to give that help. And so it's important for us to be aware of that and know what's happening. We've all lost, plenty of friends, uh, even just lately in the past few years, due to addiction, and it's very terrible. You mentioned fentanyl, you mentioned methadone, and heroin. These are all things that plague our community. not just the artistic community, but our cities. But it really does plague the artistic community, and artists seem to be sensitive to this stuff and seek it out as a way to maybe to escape or to feel better. And it's terrible, and we've lost a lot of people in our community. So I thank you for that. And as we come to the hour mark, so these talks are normally an hour. I knew that we were going to go through this very quickly, just in sharing and hearing a little bit about your story. And so we're gonna end the talk. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for sharing even this and this for sharing this little slice of your life with us. It means a lot that you're willing to share your work and talk about your photography and your experiences uh, to us here at the Museum of Graffiti. And so thank you very much, uh, Disco Bryso, for doing that for us, man.
I appreciate it, Alan, and I I don't intend to hijack the you know the the branding of the talk at all, but I did a talk with a podcast, Angel and Z, and they do a lot of, I think, great work in terms of, rooting out stories in the community. I plan to do another one, which is also just based around the theme of addiction and some of these experiences. So the more people are listening and I think paying attention to these things, the more people are going to be willing to share those stories. So just keep your eyes peeled for not just myself, but for the other voices that are going to emerge as time goes on. And I mean, you have a lot of great um, reflections about not just the things that I have to say, but clearly the overall levels of experience that occur. And I really appreciate being able to hear those. So thank you for having me.
No, it's truly our pleasure. And you shouted out Angel and Z podcast. It's a great podcast. I would recommend everybody to search them out. They're great interviewers. They meet all kinds of people from all over the country. And I was on there recently as well as a interview subject, and I really enjoyed meeting them. And so it's great to see people in our community that want to document and share and invest their time and energy into this. And so I appreciate those guys very much. And for all of you guys that are out there and that you're starting to travel around, this is great that we have these live artist talks on Instagram, but we do them also in person here at the museum. We're a very special place, the only graffiti museum of its kind are in the world, which is unfortunate. And so we're just starting to show the world that we should be recognized and respected and treated with dignity, like many other art forms or many art forms do. We hope that other people open other museums like this around the world to continue to celebrate their scenes or their cities and their stories. There's a need for 50 of these museums, and so it's just the beginning. And please come and visit. Stay tuned. Thank you so much to everybody who's supported tonight and purchased a badge and donated some money to the museum. In lieu of what we do, and visit. And if you go on our website, you can see more about what we do and classes that we host and events that we host. And in our online gift shop, there's books and all kinds of great things for those of you that want to learn more about this great art movement. Uh, we we've got you. Disco, thanks again, everybody. Thank you so much for spending an hour with us tonight. My name is Alan Kett. I'm the co-founder here at the Museum of Graffiti and its curator, and we appreciate everybody. Thank you very much, Disco, and everybody else. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Peace.